If you ask me, one of the most important aspects of any game company worth scrutinizing with a fine-tooth comb nowadays is their refund policy. We have seen time and again how the way AAA games are marketed these days often don't live up to reality. Perhaps the best example of this is Fallout 76, a game Bethesda advertised to be this incredible online experience, only for it to ship half-baked and downright broken, alongside a compromised collector's edition that falsely marketed one of its items. The situation could have been contained better had Bethesda recognized their mistakes and allowed understandably disgruntled customers to return the game and get their hard-earned money back, but instead, all they've done so far is offer dismissive, boilerplate PR responses, as well as insultingly meager recompense. This all resulted in people bringing into question Bethesda's decision to release Fallout 76 exclusively on Bethesda's proprietary launcher, whose return policy is much more restrictive and practically non-existent for digital purchases, whereas Steam offers very clear and reasonable stipulations for getting refunds. Also worth considering is the way games nowadays ship one way and evolve into something else entirely. Games like Black Ops 4 shipped free of microtransactions so that feedback and reviews would be more generous, but looking at the state of the game now with its dreadful monetization scheme, one can hardly say it feels like the same experience. The current landscape of AAA games and the deceitful proclivities of greedy game companies make it more important than ever that customers are given reasonable means to get their money back, which is why when I started hearing about how companies like EA are refusing to provide refunds to customers who are following the guidelines of their refund policy, I felt compelled to talk about it. The following information was conveyed by user Papamj, who's been having a rather rough experience with EA's notoriously shoddy customer support. This story begins with the user making a purchase on January 2nd, 2019, having spent €15 on Star Wars Battlefront Ultimate Edition. That's the first Battlefront game from 2015. However, for whatever reason, he decided that he would return the product and get a refund, which is well within his right. Important to note is that EA's official page for getting refunds for EA games within Origin are very clear. One of the first statements you'll find reads, quote, "We stand by our games. If you're not completely in love with your purchase, we will make it right." It's pretty laughable that they're labeling their policy the Great Game Guarantee when the majority of EA products are far from great. But their supposed philosophy is that if a customer doesn't think a game is great, it can be returned. From there, the page highlights 3 main points for customers to keep in mind. You can request a refund within 24 hours after you first launch the game, within 14 days from the day the game was bought as long as it hasn't been launched, and within 14 days from the release date if you pre-ordered the game as long as it hasn't been launched. On top of that, the page states that if customers buy an EA game within 30 days of its release date and can't play it due to problems outside their control, namely technical issues on the game or EA's end, a refund can be requested within 72 hours of launching the game rather than the usual 24. It's with these stipulations in mind that this Reddit user decided to request a refund for the EA game that he had recently purchased. Many will probably agree that the guidelines seem pretty reasonable, but that's only as long as EA is willing to fulfill them, and that's where customers might run into problems if this Reddit user's experience is anything to go by. According to the user, they launched Star Wars Battlefront less than 24 hours before submitting their refund ticket, with less than 14 days having elapsed since the purchase was made, falling well within the conditions under which customers can get their money back, and yet EA support has refused to refund the product. On this Reddit post, the user has been chronicling all developments surrounding this issue since the refund request was first made. Looking at these occurrences, you'll quickly discover just how baffling the level of incompetence and negligence from EA support is. The first response the user received was that EA does not have the option to refund the game, so naturally they reached out to another customer representative to rectify the situation. After reminding them that the company's refund policy motto is that they stand by their games and that they'll make things right if customers aren't in love with their purchases, the user proceeded by expressing they don't feel the refund refusal feels like the company's making things right, before highlighting the bullet points that are clearly listed on the official website. In response, the customer support representative claimed that more than 24 hours had passed since the game was first launched, to which the user responded by pointing the exact date and time frame during which the refund ticket was first submitted, before noting that the ticket was created before the 24 hours expired and that the user's been in contact with EA customer support since before the 24 hours expired. Naturally, it makes sense that a customer's eligibility for a refund should be based on whether a ticket has been submitted within the allotted window, rather than on whether the entire process is carried out within the allotted window. Otherwise, companies would simply be able to respond late and claim that the grace period has expired in order to cheat customers from refunds. The customer support representative knew this too, as right after the user pointed out that the ticket was submitted less than 24 hours after the game was launched, they backtracked by claiming that the policy actually meant 24 hours from the date of purchase. But the user corrected the representative by stating that it's 24 hours after you first launch the game and that this is black and white on the official website, literally and figuratively. Having no other tangible response but still intent on refusing to issue a refund, the EA support representative simply said, "I can understand, however, we are not able to refund the game." So, right after unsuccessfully attempting to feed a customer false information about their own refund policies, they simply said that they're not able to refund the game despite conceding that the customer met all the conditions of getting their money back. "Please accept my apologies for any inconvenience this has caused," the representative concluded, but this isn't a mere inconvenience, it's flat out a scam and pure deceit. A company cannot claim to guarantee refunds for dissatisfied customers and then not deliver on that promise. Now, this is just the first encounter the users had with EA support. He then proceeded to speak with another representative in hopes that the previous conversation was some kind of fluke. Unfortunately, the experience wasn't any different with the next representative. After explaining that the product is being returned because the game is having trouble filling lobbies to find and start a game, the response the user got was that EA support would be unable to provide a refund. The user was also asked if they'd like to go through troubleshooting steps to help resolve the issue of lobbies being unable to find enough players for hours on end, but the user expressed that they've already been through the same troubleshooting process several times already. The representative was then asked for an explanation on why the user cannot get a refund when the requirements have been met, but the representative refused to provide a transparent response, simply stating that the option is just not available. The user then proceeded to ask if this situation could be escalated with a senior member of the staff, but once again the response the representative provided was that the option was not available. Then, when the user asked how to get in touch with a manager before expressing discontent over how the past 5 hours have been fruitless, with nobody on EA support willing to provide reasonable responses to inquiries regarding his eligibility for a refund, the representative refused to provide information about getting in touch with a manager before disconnecting the chat, claiming they felt they had provided all the necessary information and claiming they wanted to avoid the conversation from becoming repetitive. Yup, EA support literally hung up on a customer without clearing up the glaring issue of the company not following its own refund policy. From there, the Reddit user updated his post by stating that EA support had offered to call him in order to help resolve this issue, but apparently the phone only rang for a second and the user wasn't able to pick up on time, and then when they offered to call again, the call just never came. Day 1 finally ended with a whimper as the user said they'd try again in a few hours after having gone through a similar process with 5 other different representatives, still without a meaningful answer. Thus began Day 2, during which the user finally managed to get a hold of a supervisor via text chat, though the user suspected that they spoke to an ordinary employee pretending to be a supervisor and that the employee might be one of the people he had previously spoken to. The so-called supervisor wasn't much help either, simply providing a link to the returns and cancellations policy page that details refund requirements the user meets for the 10th time. The Reddit user then posted a screen grab indicating that this so-called supervisor doesn't even seem to be able to read chat history, leaving the user to copy and paste excerpts from previous conversations. In another screen grab, the so-called supervisor can be seen saying that more than 24 hours had passed since the game was launched, but the user retorted by stating that 24 hours had not elapsed when the original ticket was submitted. The user then noted that he has kept a record of chat logs and timestamps as evidence for the ensuing foul play. Indeed, it's possible to see in this image that the original ticket was submitted on January 5th, the day the user launched Star Wars Battlefront, and this Reddit post was also published on the same day a short time later. Going back to the chat, the so-called supervisor then stated that had the user contacted EA support within 24 hours, the option for a refund would be available, though as the user had pointed out a million times, that's exactly what he did. When the user responded with, "I did," the so-called supervisor merely brushed the response aside, claimed the user is requesting for something that is not possible on their end, and then proclaimed that a resolution had been provided for the issue before abruptly closing the chat session. Finally, for the second day, the user detailed one more chat session with EA support, in which the representative vaguely detailed how they check for whether a customer is eligible for a refund. After more fake sympathy, continued insistence that a refund is not possible, and refusal to provide a proper explanation, the user asked for EA support to check when the game was launched and provide evidence that it was not within the 24-hour time limit. The representative simply replied that there is nothing wrong with a support website, that it automatically checks the criteria for the game and processes the refund, and that if a user has been denied by this automated system, it means that they are unequivocally ineligible. When asked if they could go into the system and check when the user first launched Star Wars Battlefront, the representative said that they cannot check that because the refund tool is completely automated. The user then raised the point that if there is an automated tool that checks for when users launch their games to determine if they're eligible for a refund, then surely the support staff should be able to access data regarding game launch date and time as well, but the representative dismissively responded with, "I'd like to help, but it seems rather difficult." At this point, the user is rather upset, and understandably so, but by the end, the representative continued to insist that the automated system's deliberation is final, and that support cannot help in issuing a refund. And finally, they once again simply ended the chat session abruptly. This brings us to the third day, at which point the user expressed their intention to ask EA support for a response regarding consumer protection laws in the European Union, and that they'd be trying to reach out to news sites and social media users to make this issue more prevalent. The user also emphasized that this was not just about getting 15 euros back, but rather about calling out EA's propensity to mistreat and neglect their players and paying customers, noting how something like this could happen again and again if they get away with it. In other words, it's the principle of it, and assuming the Reddit user is being truthful about his account, I for one could not agree more. There is ample evidence to suggest that the Reddit user did in fact meet the criteria for reimbursement in accordance to EA's own policies, and if he somehow wasn't, all he was asking for was evidence that his ticket was submitted 24 hours after he had launched the game, or for an explanation as to why his refund was being rejected when requirements have been met. EA support couldn't provide any of that, giving out robotic, pre-scripted, dismissive responses instead, an EA signature. Now, from where I'm sitting, it would seem as though the real culprit is the automated system that EA set up rather than the representatives themselves, though many of the representatives' responses are pretty questionable in their own right. The fact remains that customer representatives' jobs is to follow guidelines set forth by their employers, and they cannot act outside of those boundaries, hence why they often come off so robotic. In this case, the representatives seem to be bound by some kind of software that automatically determines whether a player is eligible for a refund, and if it determines that the player isn't, the representative's job is to merely convey that information, and they are seemingly unable to make an exception. So if the automated system happens to make a bad call and happens to be malfunctioning, customer support cannot do anything about it, because ultimately it's an algorithm that's running refund-related support, not actual people. The representatives in this case are nothing more than the messengers that convey the algorithm's deliberation to paying customers. It's just an all-around crappy system that reminds me a lot of YouTube's automated content ID algorithm that's notorious for flagging and demonetizing videos willy-nilly via false copyright claims and unreliable filtering of mature content. But EA's automated system manages to be worse somehow because there's no way to actually appeal any of the deliberations, and YouTube's system is bad enough as it is. Whatever EA's refund algorithm determines is taken as law in the refund department, with no room for the human element to bring some nuance to the automated decision making. So there will be people out there who will simply get screwed over without recourse. This, ladies and gentlemen, is how EA has chosen to fulfill their promise that if customers aren't completely in love with their purchase, they'll make it right. This is what's hiding behind the veil of the Great Game Guarantee. EA is guaranteeing customer satisfaction by having a shoddily built program handle the task, a program that cannot even get the most basic aspects of EA's official refund policy right. I suppose none of this should come as a huge surprise given EA's well-documented history of disregarding the quality of their products or the satisfaction of their customers. But that's certainly no reason to stay silent about this, as there are plenty of other customers out there who may have or who may become affected by this. They'll think they have a generous window to try out a game and return it if they end up not liking it, but their refund request may end up getting denied by a dumb machine and by representatives who are merely an extension of a machine. It would seem as though there isn't any real guarantee that you'll get your money back, even if you're following EA's refund guidelines to a T, as the publisher cannot seem to deem refunds important enough to implement a proper system, much like how they cannot seem to deem customers important enough to ship a game that isn't half-baked, broken, or infested with scummy monetization schemes. So there you have it, folks, everything you need to know about EA refusing to accept a customer's refund request. I'd love to hear what your take is on this situation in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.